Austin. Excuse me. I'd like to thank you for allowing me into your homes for this 27th edition of Season 4 of Esoteric Science Roundtable. And the first thing that I want to quickly note is to make an announcement of the metaphysical and philosophical meeting that is going to be held next Wednesday, which is the meeting that we here at Esoteric Science Roundtable and the fine folks over at Therefore I Am, Christy Course and crew co-host each and every third Wednesday of the month. And so for June, that will be following on the 15th. And we encourage anyone that's interested to please come join us upstairs at Opal Divines. We meet at 8 p.m. until whenever people are of a mind to leave, and we discuss what we discuss on our respective shows, or really anything that you're interested in. You're more than welcome to check this out. It's very casual, very relaxed, and very free. So anyone that's interested, please mark your calendar. June 15th is, again, the metaphysical philosophical meeting that we have, that we co-host. And it's probably going to do it for announcements, so I want to go ahead and start getting into the show itself and start discussing the topic at hand. Excuse me. Today's show is called Germination, and so I want to come from an esoteric understanding or angle with fleshing out some ideas about that particular word. But the general definition of the term germination refers to the very first beginnings of life, either in a plant or an animal, the very first form that begins to be generated as that budding or coming forth or growing or emerging process starts to take place. That point is called germination. And so that idea for us certainly can apply to a lot of things. And we can understand the idea of germination just by looking around in nature and considering, for instance, trees and flowers and things of that nature. And we can consider that just from a regular perspective, that there's a lot of work that goes into the germination process for a flower, for instance, and that there are a lot of other bugs, and there's a lot of work that goes into the whole process, and the bees that are involved with the pollen and carrying the pollen and things of that nature certainly would be one consideration. But that there's a cooperative group effort, an energetic working out through nature to allow for this cooperation to take place and this symbiotic relationship in which the birds and the bees and the flowers and all these things are able to help each other coexist. And so this is an example for us to begin with to consider from nature. Excuse me. And so the idea that there is certainly some energy involved in this coming forward, in this budding and this blossoming forth from this inception point, that there in an esoteric sense, from that perspective, there has to be an inner causative starting point for germination. The real germination point on the inner planes, or the point of creative thought, or just creation, if you will. Excuse me. In that, from that point, for the basic concept of a flower had to be thought up or initiated at some level at some point in time. And we can consider this an aspect or a component of the mind of God, just like we can think of anything in creation. And conversely, or not conversely, but just as well, trace it back to its causative or originating points. And the energetic idea that was the first starting point, again, the germination point, at the thought level or the level of mind that allowed for that idea to ultimately become something that could germinate and become something active on the physical plane. And so this idea that there is a template or a blueprint or something, some idea, some inception point that allows for this to unfold itself, to blossom out and to, again, find expression ultimately on the physical plane. And so by virtue of that, it would stand to reason that there are also there's some sort of energetic assistance at the causative level as well to help carry forth the pattern or the plan or the idea for something, again, into some fuller manifestation. And so this is indeed the case, and there are those energies at different levels of on the evolutionary ladder that are going to, in their own way, help with the creative process. some being more cognizant of the process than others. If we consider the angelic realms, certainly they are more cognizant of the work they're doing. The angels do not operate under so-called free will, but they nonetheless willingly cooperate with the creation process, and so they play a big component part. But there are lesser lives that make up this process, and they help this building process, again, in the inner plane, or from the mental plane, from the idea stage, to allow it to blossom forth and express itself on the physical plane. And so there are, again, these lesser lives. And ideas from folk tales and fairy tales of the past that speak of fairies and sprites and brownies and pixies and gnomes and all of these various little, again, elementals would be a collective general term that you could use to categorize these again, lesser lives that are mostly involved in the building process. Now, there is also these same elementals can also be employed for a destructive work as well. And so this is going to depend on the marching orders that these elementals get, in a sense, or whatever the intent behind the blueprint is in order to allow the unfolding of that idea. And so whatever the initiating or originating intent was behind whatever pattern is seeking manifestation, that is going to play a large role in the quality of the energy and how that manifests itself. And so if there is, again, a very materialistic idea or a very selfish idea behind the creation, then that will reflect itself in the building process. And again, considering that the work that these elementals can be charged with can be either of a building or constructive type of work, or it can also be a destroying type work. The destroying type of work isn't in and of itself negative or bad work, although it can be implemented or employed for those ends. For the most part, this is part of the process of the building and destroying. If we get back to the idea of the flower again, just like with anything, it is expressed through a form. It finds its fullest point of expression on the physical plane, and then it starts to recede, and go back to where it came originally. And so the whole idea of ashes to ashes and dust to dust. And so this whole ebb and flow is part of the whole life process. And so we see things cycling in and out, coming into form and passing out of the form, the energy underlying the form that continues to, again, seek expression through varying forms as it seeks to evolve itself and seeks to become more aware and more inclusive. And so, again, different forms have to be constructed to be right and proper for the capacity of the energy. And so whatever one's level of consciousness and awareness, one would find oneself in the vessel or in the form that's right and adequate and proper to allow that expression of energy to take place. And so further evolution can continue to do its work, and that process, again, is an ongoing effort. And this whole evolutionary effort from the level of mineral, plant, animal, man, and above that continues to find its expression on this planet. And there are opportunities more so as we move into the future for more of a cooperative endeavor between these various kingdoms. And I think we will see that very much so evidence itself in, let's say, the next 10 to 20 years as various things do unfold themselves within the consciousness of the planet, and also by virtue of some of the energetic playings that are going on right now, some of the energy that's having its effect on the Earth right now, and in particular the so-called Aquarian energy that is helping to blend other energies, help to synthesize, and help to invigorate a spirit of cooperation. So, excuse me. So again, the idea that there is, in relation to the idea of just a plant or a flower blossoming forward, that there is the plan for the flower at some level. It had to be thought of or originated at some level before it could become a physical thing that we could actually see and have before us. So this idea also ties into a larger scale in that for the globe itself, there is also this coming forth into manifestation, and there is also a plan that exists that has many different components that reflect through our humanity and through, again, the various kingdoms in nature. And so the flower coming forward is one small component or one small expression of a much greater working out. And if we really take the time to think about all of the different species and varieties of plants and animals and all the varieties and diversity among our humanity on the planet, to think of that as purely random, to me, I just don't see how a thinking person could really come to that conclusion. After, whether coming from a philosophical angle or a scientific angle or a religious angle or whatever the case may be, it seems though at some point that there has to be some synthesis of thought, that there has to be some underlying plan behind all this, that these things cannot just be randomly so symbiotic and so well fit together, and the way that things are so intricately a part of one another and so interconnected just on our planet, let alone within the much greater expanse of the universe. So this again, looking at nature and using it as an analogy for a greater working out, this is where a lot of our previous philosophers and people that were considered magicians or occultists or whatever term you want to choose to use for them, use this line of reasoning and deduction to come across some great discoveries. And so this again, I think, lends itself to the idea that the way in which things are woven together on this planet and elsewhere really do lead or lend to the concept that there must be some creator or some intelligence or some architect underlying all this. And I do think that is without question the case. And this is how, again, these things are demonstrated to us. And so there is also a way in which men, self-conscious men, can become aware of this plan for the working out of our planet. And the idea that we can make our wills one with the Father. This is certainly not something that we can snap our fingers and accomplish, but we can start to, as we set our wills and align ourselves towards this mode of thinking, this manner of thinking, in this line of questioning, that we can bring ourselves into some alignment with this will or this working out of this plan for the evolution of our planet. Granted, with our finite human minds, we can only perceive or tap into the will aspect of the planet to only a certain degree. Traditionally, the will nature of the planet steps itself down, and it works through Christ and the Church Invisible, and they in turn are the mediators of this energy, and they will put it in a proper mode that it would be usable for our humanity. And this has changed somewhat within more recent times. Far back into antiquity, we had seen the will find its way into our human, with a direct contact with humanity, when we became self-conscious or individualized humanity. And then during the Atlantean days, when there was a great cataclysm and there was a war between the so-called white magicians and black magicians, that there was also a coming forth of this will aspect directly to humanity. And then more recently in 1975, and then again more recently in 2000, and that energetic merging of the will nature, excuse me, in 2000, has its direct correlation with the 9/11 events. And that energetic causative underlying merging did unleash that event at certainly many levels. And that's one consideration to factor in as well, that again, this underlying energy and this plan manifests itself at many different varying levels. And once humankind can become cognizant at some level and a willing participant at some level with that plan, and seek on a daily basis to express some aspect of that plan as best as they're able to interpret it, then we can see some progressions on the planet that will allow for germination of a different type, in which there will be cooperation among the sons of men, cooperation among various nations, and a real sense of synthesis wherein which sovereignty and individual identity won't be swallowed up, but there will be systems in place that will be a lot more fair for greater numbers of people. And so I think this will definitely reflect itself as, again, these further germinations flesh themselves out. There is the idea also that anything in manifestation is of God. And so as things are coming into manifestation, this is known as the involutionary path of manifestation. And so as there's this involutionary, or coming into matter, into dense manifestation energy, this is also mistakenly termed as evil, because things in the dense material nature are also things that in this day and age they found their relegated place, and they've been termed all the separate material tendencies that find their manifestation, whether that find its way into sex crimes, or whether that find its way into any kind of the deviant behavior we can consider, or just man's inhumanity against man, that this finds its reflection in this manner. And so this involutionary process, this coming into matter process, is part and parcel of our very being, of our very nature. And if we did not come into the dense physical nature as a spiritual being in order to experience things, then the existence and the plan for this planet would not be. There would be no reason for that. But again, as I am seeking to emphasize on the show, I firmly feel there is a plan for the evolution of the planet and for our human evolution, in addition to the lesser kingdoms on the planet. And so as we can, again, tap into this plan, the more we can seek to do our part to help some of these things really manifest themselves. But to consider the involutionary, or the material, as evil per se is a bit of a stretch, or a bit of I think a misnomer or a mistake, because again, this is part of our humanity, and these things play their role for us, again, to have contrast. There has to be a polarity or a duality in nature for spirit to move through matter and to strengthen and emphasize itself. And so this is the process. Spirit moves through matter, it evolves, it takes on new qualities from the experience, and it is vivified and it's expanded in its journey or its mission. And so the whole of evolution is uplifted as humanity uplifts itself, and as other, again, points in evolution are uplifted. One example of the animal evolution in relation to our human influence, our magnetic influence, is with the domestic animals, the dogs and the cats and all the other pets we bring into our homes, horses, things of that nature. They have an intermediary role to play between the wild animals and our humanity. And so they're becoming slowly more integrated into the human family, and they will in their own turn find their way into humanity. When we think of ideas of karma, this is often one of the things that is of concern to people. They feel that they might go back into an animal state if they've sinned, or if they've been over material in their attitude and in their life expression. And this is really not the case. Karma and the evolutionary trend and its pulls us upwards, and we maintain, once we become self-conscious, we maintain that self-consciousness. And so humanity stays as humanity, and then the animal kingdom can eventually work its way, animal by animal really, into an individualized condition, and this can work its way out too. This is not a fast process. I would hope that would be reasonably obvious, but if we can take that hypothetically and consider that that is an idea, a potential consideration, that animals can evolve into a greater condition, and the next rung on the evolutionary ladder for them is humanity, is self-conscious self-awareness. And some animals are demonstrating at a near level to that. Animals are already naturally psychic, so they have a leg up in that respect. But again, the domestic animal would be the reflection of that intermediary. And so the working out past the point of involution works its way past the densest point of matter, which for our humanity we reached in the so-called Greco-Roman days. And this is when the advent of Christ came into manifestation, to allow this, again, this compulsion, this magnetic pull upward. If I be lifted up, will draw all men unto me. And this is part of this coming into dense physical matter and manifestation by Christ, so that literally men would be lifted up, and spiritually men would be lifted up, and in all manner men would be lifted up by virtue of that, the advent of that working out on the physical plane. Excuse me. And so that was the high culmination of our beginning to evolve and pass from involution into the upward ascending arc of evolution, and on demonstrating a definite tendency towards return to divinity. And so this tendency, as it gains in sway, becomes known in metaphysical parlance as Christ consciousness, or self-awareness, or many other terms that that refer to, again, an expansion of our awareness, an expansion of consciousness, and a more inclusive attitude towards not only ourselves, but just the world around us, and everything that comes into our realm of understanding. We would have a more refined sense of by virtue of this evolutionary process. And so this is, again, what we were able to bring into ourselves through the advent of Christ. And this is what is spoken of by St. Paul in Christ in you, the hope of glory. As we take in that energy and we take that yoke, so-called, then we can also align ourselves with that intent and work with that energy, go with the flow, in order to, again, start to, as any good pilgrim would, start to make that the path of return on that journey back to divinity. And so this demonstrates itself in this respect. And so again, tying back to the flower idea, that there is a plan or a blueprint for a flower or for anything that finds itself into manifestation, whether that be some governmental idea, some social reform, some religious concept. This comes forward in the same manner. And so there is an idea or a plan or a blueprint for ideas as well that find themselves at a certain place, I guess, or there's a certain state of consciousness that would have to be achieved in order to tap into these ideas at varying levels. And humanity, unless there's the really just so involved in ourselves that all we think about is eating, sleeping, and perhaps having sex, then that wouldn't be the case. But people above and outside of that are a little bit more inclusive in their attitude start to be responsive at some level to these ideas. And these ideas reflect themselves in pop culture, popular music, fashion trends, sports figures, the popularity that we find in the icons of the cult of personality. All these ideas reflect themselves in our human nature. Obviously, a lot of times they're coerced and they're manipulated through advertising and propaganda and things of that nature, and that's a very real consideration as well. But there is also equally a means by which ideas are impressed upon humanity, in which our free will is a lot more included in the considerations as to whether or not we're going to engage in these workings. And this is related to the ideas that Christ and the Church invisible are held in trust of. And so they take their concepts or their ideas from what is known as Shambhala esoterically, or the center where the will of God is known, the Father aspect of our creation on this planet. And so as they tap into and they ascertain at their qualitative level what is known as Shambhala, again, the center where the will of God is known, sometimes known also as Shangri-La, and these terms may be somewhat familiar from again, pop culture, that they've found their way into mainstream, just like the idea of karma, chakras. These ideas are much more mainstream. Nonetheless, the filtering down of the template or the blueprint, the template, the blueprint, can't even speak, for these concepts is held, again, as I said earlier, in a trust, so to speak, through this group, Christ and the Church Invisible. And so the various members of this executive branch are charged with their various component aspects. And so governmental teaching, the social sciences and social changes, arts, science, religion, finance, and everything else in between finds its way, education certainly, all these things find their way into manifestation by virtue of impression at this level. And so what we see flowering forth on the planet is culture then the culmination of that culture, the dying of that culture, and then a rising of a new culture. And this takes place just like the life of a person. We live, we die, and we are reborn as another person. We take with us the fruits of the previous life experience, or these cultures take with them the fruits of the previous culture, and they build upon and build upon and build upon these concepts and these ideas and these qualities and these energies that underlie this blueprint. And so every manifestation of a culture is qualified by this energy that is inherent in this plan or this idea. And so as we're able to ascertain and understand the plan, then we can help bring forward our own component part that we can be held in charge of. And so it's a stepping down process. There's a hierarchical way in which this takes place. And this takes place still for the involutionary cycle too. We're not completely finished with our material nature, and so this still has its working out, and there still is so-called evil or material forces that play themselves out. There's a right and necessary aspect of that, and then there is what is, again, been relegated to what we term evil. And that is an excess of the material nature, and that is also tied up in karma and the leftover material debts that we've incurred in previous existence. And so we have that tied to us like a albatross around our neck, and we have to pay that off ultimately. And then we have to still wade through the material nature. So the involutionary, evolutionary flux and flow still pans itself out and plays out. Also within the culture, we have the energetic playing out of these cultures. Again, the rise and decline of civilization and the cultures that characterize those civilizations as they manifest and decline. This is analogous also to the breath. As the breath does its thing, it's the expression from the causative point, from that point of origin, comes forth the expression of the breath, and then it does its expanding outward work, and then there's the indrawing of the breath, and then everything is retracted, it's drawn back in. And so this finds expression in this analogy as well with the culture and civilization, that as the destruction or the end point of one culture is finished or has found its zenith point, then at that point, and then again, that's a little bit misleading as well, because there's always overlapping. There's never real one sharp division point where this culture has ended at this year, and then this one begins at this year. There's, again, always overlapping. And this is, again, drawing it back to all areas of human endeavor. There is never, one point where one scientific discovery evenly meets the next, and there's some logical linear pattern to these things. Everything overlaps and merges and interconnects with itself. Again, getting back to the first idea, there is a grand architect underlying all these things, and there is an energetic moving out that we can understand and work out at some level. And so this idea that there is an energy that plays out through these movings and shakings. And so the quality of energy, or the title for the energy that is the destructive energy of the civilization or the culture, would be known as first ray, will or power. This destroys. Then the second ray of love or wisdom allows the reconstruction, the salvaging of what is still good and proper for the new inclination or new impulse. And again, the salvaging, cooperation, construction, and the building of the upcoming new civilization. So the impression of the new blueprints is held in the trust of the second ray builders in that respect, and that they are they're seeking to express, again, the constructive, the rebuilding, and start to get the qualities aligned and have the qualities meet adequate forms. And that is their job, that is their task, to allow the qualities to meet with the proper and right forms. And so as these forms manifest themselves and become active, then we have the third ray, active intelligence. And then we have the qualities of the new culture emerging. It's like a building. Once the building has been built, it still has to take on its use. It has to become a pizza parlor, for instance, and then all of the people that work there and all of the customers and all of the people that interact with that business make its living, vibrant component. They make it really what it is. Otherwise, it would just be a shell of a building, and it could be anything. It could the next day be some real estate company, so depending. this idea that things are qualified. Once they're built and constructed, then they're qualified with energies that give them their inherent qualities, traits, and make them what they're identifiable by. And so, in the physical vehicle, obviously hair color and skin complexion and da. But nonetheless, in emerging cultures, this definitely has its expression. And there's also another esoteric component that I want to tie to the idea of these first rays, or these first 3 rays in the 7 rays in manifestation, and another correlation that ties to each one, and that is with the first ray, this is sacrifice. The spiritual component, our spiritual nature and what is truly the essence of God, had to ultimately sacrifice itself in order to come into matter and to manifest and to go through this dance and to weigh itself down and to have to, again, go through this trial and tribulation of the dense physical plane. And so as it's working its way through this process, this evolutionary process, it is sacrificing itself to this evolutionary trend, and ultimately sacrificing itself to an aspect of its own will. Its own will is to evolve, and so it willingly sacrifices itself, and we are a component of that sacrifice. Once we understand the nature of sacrifice, then we can, at some level, take in a component or a portion of this first ray energy and have a willing sacrifice of our own self. And this generally tends to demonstrate itself in tendencies that start to lead one into more of a group thinking, away from just selfish me, oh, I need this for myself, kind of thinking. It allows a more expansive approach and a more inclusive attitude. And so as that seeks to demonstrate itself and expand into our consciousness, then the ideas of sacrifice can be willfully taken up. And this is the idea of Christ and the cross and the crucifixion on the cross of matter. Spirit is crucified or sacrificed through matter or on matter. And again, we have plenty of analogies to indicate that for us. And then there's another aspect or another, these are also termed, used in terms of petal, like a petal on a flower. And so again, getting back to the flower analogy somewhat as well. The sacrifice petal I initially spoke of, first ray. Then the second ray petals are the love petals. And this again is an aspect of synthesis and cooperation that is built on, again, the cooperation, love, and wisdom, a selfless point of pure reason in which no favorites are picked, and you don't say, and you're not at a point where you're thinking, oh, this girl is better than this girl, or this flavor of ice cream is better than this flavor, or this country is better than this flavor. You're indifferent in a divine sense. You're divinely indifferent to all of these things, and so that inclusive approach, this approach of pure reason, is also tied into this love petal nature and the construction aspect, the building process. Then the third ray, the active intelligence, is equated with the so-called knowledge petals. And so we have sacrifice, love, and knowledge. And these are often reflected in Eastern symbology within the lotus flower, and that we find within the lotus a so-called jewel within the lotus. And this reflects really getting in touch with our own higher nature, getting in touch with the soul nature, and then ultimately with the incarnating spiritual nature, the highest initiating aspect of ourselves. And this is done, again, through a willing sacrifice, through love, and through seeking of knowledge and seeking of truth. And as these concepts expand themselves through humanity, as this flower culminates more so, then we'll see the fruit of this expression. We'll see more evidence of this working itself out. And now, certainly, as I said earlier, everyone in humanity is at some level responsive to these incoming energies that impress our minds at some level, and they impress our hearts at some level, certainly as well. Certain people are going to be more cognizant of that, and certain people are going to be less aware of that. But at some level, almost all of humanity responds to this incoming energy. The key thing is to when people can, again, willingly sacrifice their energies, their efforts, their ideas, and their intents to a greater working out. Now again, there's no reason why one has to sacrifice one's sovereignty or one's inner core constitution in this more inclusive work, and that is something that frightens a lot of people. And I know as I've moved through and worked through a lot of these considerations in my own life, I've had to consider that, and I've had to allow for that imposing, that gnawing, that this is a too extreme of a condition, that to try to bring in the spiritual nature and to be, as spiritual as one can possibly be. It can be difficult in one respect. It's like, how do you relate to people? And again, how do you maintain your own ideas if you're willingly giving up your own consciousness to a great degree to the will of God? And how do you maintain, again, maybe your own ideas? That is certainly a concern for many people. But ultimately it comes down to, or boils down to, a willing synthesis with the larger will as one is able to interpret and implement it. And one would willingly do so. And then once one's will automatically aligns itself with that larger will, then one is perfectly at home and perfectly at ease with that. And it again kind of ties back to the idea from the Bible narrative, from the gospel narrative of Christ saying, "Take my yoke, my burden is light, the load is easy." I'm paraphrasing somewhat, but this idea that once you take on this responsibility and you do it willingly, that it becomes something, it becomes a very joyful condition. And continuing on that joyful path of return to divinity, one realizes that one would have great difficulty backtracking into a more material or a more less inclusive state of mind, that you just can't go back to just being like a couch slouch kind of person that just doesn't give a rat about anything. And so that responsibility kicks in, that sense of obligation and opportunity is very much alive and invigorated, and that heart energy is animated, that fires the idea. And so the idea is fed by the fuel and the fire of the heart. And so as that desire feeds and builds and gives the idea juice and gives it wings ultimately, and gives it a means by which it can be energetically worked out, then we find ourselves again continuing that evolutionary or upward arc towards where we initially came from. And this is part of the evolutionary trend. It's part of what's expressed in all of the great religious texts, although veiled in analogy and allegory and symbolically. Nonetheless, it's all a story of return to divinity if you really can decipher it in that context. And this should or could be a point of consolation, and could put one at ease to a certain degree, I would hope, if one could realize that we're all working towards a consummation of our spiritual nature, and that we're not done yet. There's a lot more evolving yet to do. There is no end time on the horizon anytime in the near term. We are certainly going through transition points and huge transitions on this planet, absolutely no question. And this is part and parcel of this greater unfolding of this flower that is the plan manifesting behind the will of God as it plays out on the planet. As this thing takes form and becomes more tangible and recognizable by those that can see it for what it is, there are going to be those that are going to hop on. There are still going to be those so-called black magicians, or those on the involutionary path, that are going to seek to prevent the evolution to continue to great an extent, because this would jeopardize their very existence. And so they're in the death throes at some level. And so this is part and parcel of what plays itself out through New World Order wranglings and shapings out and playings out, that the death throes of the involutionary energies are culminating, and so there is definitely that battle being waged between the polarity at this time. And so we are having this pole shift into a more inclusive attitude, and this does have a component in which mankind will take on a kinder, gentler mentality, and a more of a feminine attitude or energy will be expressed throughout humanity, and a more of a nurturing, that's probably the better term, more of a nurturing attitude. And so people will truly consider themselves as their brother's keeper more so in the future, only in the sense that they feel the obligation to look after and nurture and see that the needs of their fellow men are met, not in the sense that they're their brother's keeper as like a jail keeper, that they have to keep somebody in line or keep them, with the way I'm thinking. You need to think like I'm thinking. I'm my brother's keeper. I'm going to keep him in step with how I'm supposed to think and how society teaches us to think and expects us to act and behave. And that's not the case. The behavioral sciences need to be really, really overhauled in a big way, so that behavior is based on this natural welling up of our soul nature, and a natural cooperation, a natural spirit of intent, a natural compulsion deep within ourselves. This fire inside the heart that animates and drives us and compels us to greater things, more inclusive things. That this will be the compelling magnetic energy that will ultimately, I don't want to use the word force because this is a willing sacrifice, but this will place us in the state of mind, in an inclusive state of mind, to the point where humanity will feel that the obligation to help their fellow men. There will be this dire sense that things need to be reconciled and resolved within humanity. And so as this finds expression through various ideas, and again, this ties back again to this seven-ray energy, and that there are custodians, executives, or Christ in the Church Invisible, that take this energy and place it in a position that it's understandable or apprehendable by different aspects of humanity. And so the scientist is going to get an idea. He's going to get the eureka flash for some new invention, perhaps some new medical breakthrough, new mode of transportation, new way of using energy, a new social reform, a new ideas in finance and things like this. These have to find their way into human expression, and so this plan at the greater scale is seeking to implement itself, and different components of humanity pick up on these ideas and tap into them. And that's where you also get the secret society so-called mentality, that there are those at various levels that are working behind the scenes to seek to implement certain aspects of this energy and work through onto the physical plane. These ideas are seeking to implement. The idea of fellowship and brotherhood is the idea supposedly, allegedly, behind Masonry, and it's supposedly the idea behind the church being originated, that this fellowship concept came into being. And so this manifests itself and plays out. Now certainly there is co-opting of this idea of brotherhood and the idea of trust and the idea of what is truth and what is distortion and who can manipulate who at any given time. But nonetheless, this playing out continues to work itself through our humanity and the various kingdoms. And this is the playing out of black magic versus white magic at that level as well, that there is this jockeying for position along the evolutionary path. And so as we can seek to put ourselves in alignment with some aspect of the divine, then we will get more insight into either the evolutionary trend and work with Christ and the Church Invisible for the implementing of the greatest, the good, the true, and the beautiful, and that implementation of the plan. Or on the involutionary material nature, those that are so caught up in the allure of that, the dense physical, and of the world, that they only identify with that energy, that there will be those that still maintain that, and that's right and proper for them as well. So to be judgmental of those that make those choices is, I don't feel proper ultimately, because it's all part of a playing out of evolution, and ultimately they'll have their opportunity to have their day in the sun as well, once they sacrifice themselves in a right and proper manner to align with the greater will. So as this manifests itself, those that can recognize it will recognize it. Those that feel compelled to be responsible for some component of it will jump up and they'll grab whatever they need to. They'll have the tools inherent within themselves, or they'll create the tools, or they'll create the situation to implement what they see, what part of the vision what part of the plan they can apprehend and they feel compelled to bring to the physical plane. And this spirit of cooperation can be very much more expansive. It can take its way around the globe, and all of these ideas of cooperation can really be implemented if we can, again, align ourselves with this sacrificial concept, a self-sacrifice, and putting ourselves in a place where we have more inclusive ideas, but yet it's still us. We still are who we are. We're not sucked up in some great vague thing where we don't have our identity anymore. We still are us. And we're just willing participants in a bigger picture, and we're aligning ourselves with the greater will of the Creator ultimately. And this is something we can do. It's a very real and viable thing. This is why I sit here week after week and explain little aspects of the ABCs of esotericism, because we can really, really work with these concepts and implement them in a real way to change things. The ideas that are so many ideas are co-opted and changed and manipulated to make us think that we can't do these things, and that's completely wrong. Once we delve into esotericism, and those key holders, those that hold the real secrets of the so-called mysteries, and those so-called secret societies that are truly working behind the scenes to work for the evolution of humanity, they're finding their way into evidence. And these means and these methods and these modes and these modalities and this magic that can be worked and manipulated can be manipulated for the good of humanity, just as easily as it can be manipulated for the imprisoning of humanity in this material plane planet, in this dense state that we're finding ourselves evolving through. So again, the working out is based on intent, and there's always a new culture in the process of emergence as an old one is dying. And so we're seeing the death throes of the old world, so-called, and we're seeing a new world coming into view, if I can paraphrase that quote. But is it going to be good? Is it going to be bad? Is it going to be totalitarian in its intent, or is it going to be sovereignty in a synthetic fashion, where groups of nations and men willingly cooperate in a greater working out, but maintain their own ideas, their own free will, their own sovereignty in a greater working out? So that remains to be seen, but we have the real opportunity now, and that's why, again, why I emphasize this on a week-to-week basis, because we can truly implement these ideas in a real meaningful way. So let me go ahead and grab a couple of calls and see what's going on. Hello, caller, you're on the air. Hello, line one. Do you have a question or comment? Okay, I'm going to take that as a no. Thanks for holding and thanks for viewing. Hello, line three, you're on the air.
Is this Taz?
Beg pardon?
Tazio?
This is Tazio?
Sorry, it's Tazio.
Hey, how are you? How are you doing?
A long time no talk.
Yeah, true.
Hey, I like your new hairdo.
Oh, thanks. You haven't seen me in a while then.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, right. Let me, one question. I've been receiving some literature from the School of Esoteric Studies in North Carolina. How is that relationship? I remember a program you had about a month ago, esoteric school that you've been involved in New York.
Yes, that's true.
Yeah.
I don't know, honestly.
I think they use the same. They use the Lucis Trust materials.
Oh, you know what? Actually, I do. I am familiar with that organization. There was a point in time when, the founder of the school that I am a part of currently still, actually, Alice A. Bailey, she died, and her husband, Foster Bailey, he married a woman named Mary Bailey, and some of the people in the Lucis Trust organization weren't too keen on that for whatever reason, and so they did break off and have their own branch, and that is the one. I wasn't aware of the name. I'd forgotten that, but yes, that is indeed a branch, a sister group, if you will, of the organization that I'm involved with, yes.
Yeah, okay, but I really like I've been reading a lot of the Lucis Trust materials. It's good stuff.
I think a lot of people are scared of it, but once you really read it, you can see examples, like for instance, where it says, in a synthetic world situation, there doesn't have to be one world government, even though there is the term New World Order that's used in those books, and that also scares people. Again, it refers to a New World Order that can be synthetic and cooperative, where we maintain our sovereignty and we maintain our own individuality.
It's really the antithesis of the New World Order that Alex Jones talks about.
Yes, it is, but the Patriot community doesn't perceive it as that largely. I don't want to paint them wholesale, but for the vast majority of those folks, they look at it as, oh, it's just New World Order, this is the New World religion, this is the Maitreya stuff. And also a bad thing that is very negative as well is that the Benjamin Crane and the Maitreya information is also lumped in with the Lucis Trust, but he just borrowed the information. He leached the information, if you will, from the Alice Bailey books to have his own philosophy and to bring forth his own agenda. And so that also is oftentimes bunched in with these other two groups that I think have nothing, the intent is nowhere in line with what his idea is, because he's already said that Maitreya is supposed to appear back in like the 70s, and he tends to be more misleading in my humble estimation, and I'd rather not have people affiliating him and his Maitreya ideas with Lucis Trust, which I, obviously being affiliated with, feel is a good institution.
But the good news is more and more people are waking up every day.
Amen to that.
There's no doubt. And 2012 is still a very good date.
I agree completely.
Yeah. And that's all. I just, keep up the good work and Semper Fi.
All right. Hey, Tazio, if you have a chance to make it to the metaphysical meeting, by all means.
Well, I went to one 2 or 3 months ago, and I stayed there till about 9, and nobody,
If it was March, that might have been when South by Southwest was going on. That's the only month we would not have held it. Otherwise, we should have been there.
Well, no, it was before that. Anyhow, I'll give it another whirl.
Yeah, if you have an opportunity.
Okay, good. We'll talk soon.
Okay, wonderful.
All right,
take care. Bye-bye. Very good call. I really appreciate that. Yeah, again, the Lucis Trust organization has been branded a lot of things, and it's popularly known as Lucifer's Trust, although there never was a Lucifer Trust, and there not is currently, and if there is one, it's not going to be part of the Lucis Trust. I can pretty much assure that, especially as far as me being affiliated with it. So if I have any say in the matter, then that will definitely not be the case. And if people really were to read the books and not just read the little paraphrases and read them in their entirety, especially a book called Externalization of the Hierarchy, they would, I think, gain a tremendous amount of insight into, again, these ideas I'm talking about, the plan for the working out of human evolution and how culture rises and subsides and how we can play our part in that role. And that's another, since I had that segue handed to me in that respect, there are other organizations, esoteric schools or various other metaphysical groups that are seeking to work in this manner with energy and force. They're trying to work at the causative level and look at the cause behind the scenes and handle things or cure things at the causative level rather than deal with the outer effects. Because to get rid of a disease and to really solve a problem, you need to get to the core, the cause. It's just like with the fire ants, you've got to get to the queen to destroy the mound. That's kind of a silly analogy, but I think it's adequate. And so to get to the core, this is how we can work with these different groups, and there are legitimate groups that are emerging and evidencing themselves. There are those also that are shysters and charlatans, and we have to use our intuition and trust what we feel is right and appropriate. And there are oftentimes groups that people may join and they'll jump right back out of it and they'll find another organization that seems more appropriate for them, and as they evolve they'll find the one that's right for them. This is becoming more prominent in this day and age, and more people are becoming involved with Masonry on the one hand, and on the one hand not so much, but the interest in Masonry, I should say, that's a better way to look at it. The interest in Masonry has really cropped up in recent times, and that's due to the Patriot-related information and the conspiracy-related information, rightly so, because Masonry, just like a lot of these good institutions, has been used to implement ideas on the masses. And in particular on the influential, because oftentimes Masons would be the influential, the cream of the crop, so to speak, the more thinking and influential and the affluential, the people that had the means and the money at the time. So these people would be sought out more so. It's kind of like Scientology. They look for the people that have the money so that they can find influential people to influence other people to bring in prospective members. So at another level, it's somewhat like that. But with Masonry, again, the interest is becoming more prominent among folks all around, and I think this is right and proper that we're going to see the emergence of the energy behind Masonry become more valid and relevant to future humanities, because it is the idea of universal brotherhood, and as that can be expressed more so in a real and valid, real valid fashion, then we can only gain from that. We can only advance from that. So there definitely will be the emerging of more schools as time progresses. And as to which one, if one chooses to align oneself with one, would be proper for them, that remains to be seen. Some may not be ready for esoteric school for a number of lives yet. So it's an ongoing evolutionary process. But these things are going to evidence themselves, and we will be able to take advantage of these esoteric schools, as Tazio, my last caller, said, to help counteract this negative impression, this negative ideology of totalitarianism, of imposition of ideas. We have to fight against the imposition of ideas. If we willingly sacrifice to an idea, that's one thing. But if we're having things imposed on us and forced on us, that's nothing but wrong, and we have to fight against that with until our last dying breath. Go ahead and grab this other caller. Hello, caller, you're on the air.
Hey, what's going on, man?
Hey, how are you?
Doing pretty good. I just want to know if you're a faggot.
No, not this week. Check back next week and ask me again, and I'll tell you then. But no, this week I'm heterosexual. So thanks for calling. Thanks for viewing. Let's see. And so there are ideas that I've sought to express. There is another call. I'm probably, unfortunately, going to refrain from grabbing that call. So thanks for everyone that's taken the time to call this evening. But again, there are ideas that I've sought to express from the very beginning of this show when I started in October of 2001. And basically, right there you have on the screen, that sums it up in three, whatever. Enlightenment versus Enfrightenment, that we seek to enlighten and bring elucidation and bring the light of truth into the blazing, noonday sun, so that it's readily apparent for all that can see it. Truth is something that is universal. It's not something that one person can say, oh, there's truth, and somebody else says, no, that's not truth, this is truth. The real crystal core of truth is universal, is one and the same, and we can all agree upon it. We can look at it from any angle that we choose, and we'll all agree that this is truth. And as we can emerge in the spirit of cooperation based on this common truth, then we can do a lot to share, exchange, and advance the planet in so many levels, in so many ways. Spirit of cooperation is something I really also ask people to at least think about, if not seek to actively cultivate as a habit, a habitual way of thinking, an everyday habit of thought that becomes a force of habit over time, because it just becomes built into us as our natural state of thinking. This is something we really truly can do. So as we form our patterns, thought patterns, in line with a larger thought pattern, then we can do a whole heck of a lot to not only help ourselves, but help humanity. And then this sense of joy can be instilled throughout humanity. Happiness is one thing. Happiness is more of the material or personality nature. Joy is something that's of the soul, and it's something that just elates and uplifts our entire being past the point of words. And so if we can truly cultivate this cooperation ultimately into a state of joy, much can be accomplished, and this will be a good thing. So I want to thank my producer, Chris, for commanding the helm of the Starship Esoterica. I want to remind folks that we are here every Thursday, 8 p.m., Channel 11. I want to remind folks that we definitely have the Metaphysical Philosophical meeting this upcoming next Wednesday at Opal Divines, which falls on the 15th, 8 p.m. till whenever. We always meet upstairs, absolutely free, very relaxed, very casual. Want to, again, thank the viewing audience, thank all the people that have called, and take care. Have a nice evening, Austin. We'll see you. Bye.